Okay, so we're here in Fire Station Creative with a man that I met recently, Tommy McCormick. Tommy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I met in your professional capacity as somebody who works for a funding agency, and we were talking about funds. But what really piqued my interest was your personal passion, something you've been involved in for a few years. I think you're the best person to give me a summary of what it is that we're talking about today.
Of course, over the last, coming up to 5 years now, I have been running an independent library. Although it's based in Edinburgh, we distribute the books by post all across the UK. I started this initially just to help me be able to afford to buy a few other books through subscription fees. And so over that first year, we got up to about 50 members. But since that time, we've got up to about 500 members solidly over 5 years, which has been fantastic, each paying an annual subscription. The books that we try and get are not your typical library books, are not always readily available. We tend to focus on things that are out of published or rare and are a bit expensive to buy. Our main sort of themes behind the library is to look for niche collections based around the headlines of subculture, counterculture and forgotten modern classics. And although we come out of that now and then to form very small niche collections, that's the sort of basis of it.
Right. So did you start off personally as a book collector?
No, the story behind the library is I lived in Glasgow and I got a job in Edinburgh. And in that time, the only way I could afford to keep that job and travel to it was by bus because the train was too expensive. And the bus was a lengthy process. It was an hour and a half there, an hour and a half back on a good day. And that was fine. I was okay with that. But on that time, I had got a bit fed up with the human lottery of not knowing how noisy the bus would be or who you get to sit next to, where it's people going to a concert who are drunk or people going to a football match who are wild and singing. It became a bit harder to judge and it became a bit of a nuisance over like a 2 hour journey. My thoughts behind that was that I was going to find something to do on this bus to kill time and pass that and keep my brain sort of focused and working. And so for the first time in a very long time, maybe since like not too long after high school, I picked up a book and I thought I'm going to start reading on the bus, and that became a bit of a passion. At that time as well, I realised that I didn't have any sort of guidance of what to read. When I went to bookshops, I was overwhelmed because I didn't know where to start. There was so many sitting out, and sometimes I bought things based on cover. They weren't very good. So at that time, I decided to pick someone I knew who I trusted very well, and that was the film director John Waters, who was behind the film Hairspray, and he also made Sexually Demented and Pink Flamingos, a very famous guy. And I'd always followed the music and the films and everything he recommended, and I knew he was a big reader of books. So I went back to the internet and I looked up to see what books he read, and it turns out he's an avid reader, so I had a wild group of books to pick from. When I started that journey of reading the books that he picked, after about 5 I realised I hadn't read anything I didn't find incredible. Because before that it was mix and match. I was putting books down half the time. So over that first year before I started the library, I ended up amassing all the books from his collection, or not all of them, but a good collection of them. And that engaged friends' sort of interests. But after a amount of time I hit a wall, and that wall was that some of the books he had maybe came out in the 70s or 60s. They printed 500 copies, and to get my hands on a copy was going to cost me hundreds of pounds, and I didn't have hundreds of pounds because I could barely afford the bus to get to Edinburgh, never mind buy expensive books. So after moaning to friends of mine, they had pointed out that I was sitting on a bunch of books that they would love to get, so why didn't I start a small membership library? And so after that I took their idea and I ran with it, and so I set it up, and I initially said, let's get 10 of us to pay in £15 each, and we'll put all that towards buying the new books, and we'll pay a yearly subscription. They sold out in an hour, and so after that I realised I was onto something. And so over that time we picked up, and even when it got to the time of COVID, we seen an explosion. People were at home, they wanted to read more, and we seen membership bloom, and that allowed me to do two things: to buy a bigger collection, and also get books that one person couldn't buy on their own, but for 15 quid and having 500 of us, I could buy it and we'd have a small army of us to share it between us. So I can remove that sort of cultural gatekeeping behind the book itself.
So we'll come on to the business model a bit later. I'd like to explore that a little bit because that's really, really interesting. I think before we get any older, you need to tell us what's the name of your online library.
Of course, I read down one thing, the most important thing that I missed. It's called TRASHO BIBLIO.
TRASHO BIBLIO.
Then yet again, that goes back to the John Waters link. His first ever sort of non-short film, his first feature film was called Mondo Trasho. So I wanted to sort of pay tribute to that. So I came up with, took the name Trasho, and I wanted to sort of complete the same sort of phrasing. So I went for Biblio, and it just sort of stuck.
It's interesting that you said that the world of reading opened up to you when you decided to focus on the recommendations of that one film director.
Yeah.
I often meet young people who tell me that they would like to read, but they get distracted, or they don't know where to start, and they are overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. Personally, all of the best books that I read were recommendations, and it's people who understand the way that you think, and it's such an important thing as a reader, isn't it, to not just wander into a library or a bookshop and just randomly, but to actually have a goal, have an interest, and then you try to pull that thread.
Absolutely. I mean, my world of books became so much bigger that although I've read through his books, or a good majority of them over the years, I found myself going in 1,000 different directions from it. He helped form a taste, and it's much wider than him. The collection itself, it's a much more detailed collection across various different small niche genres, and so that was a gateway to me. And I think it is important to have that as well. Like when I was going to bookshops, I was just not in the right mindset. I didn't have that sort of background education wise of what book to pick. Mm-hmm. And I found it helped me grow that. And it's got to a point now that I think that I discuss sometimes the books when people are talking to me about books, and when I'm looking for things, I think about people in a certain orbit of the library. The library's got a feel to it, it's got a vibe, both in fiction and non-fiction, and I know what I'm looking for. So when I'm now looking for books, either for the library or for me to personally read, I've got this orbit of things, this little small universe of things that I know will work for me, mm-hmm. and that's the way it's growing. And now we've got about 2,500 books, and I don't stop reading. I used to be an avid film fan. I used to watch lots of TV. Used to go out a lot more, but books are my number one thing now. I spend most of my time reading.
It's funny. It's maybe a side effect of getting older as well. When you realise the value of books, and of course, films are much easier to consume and quicker, but books are more rewarding, I feel. Oh
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so focused, and I think that. For me, I still am an avid film fan. I used to be going to film festivals. I used to take 2 weeks out of work just to be in back-to-back films with them, see as many as possible, and I loved that. But by reading, I feel like bizarrely in my head, I've went back to some sort of like source material to that. I went like one step back. I used my own imagination to grow these worlds, and because reading this like massive collection, it's growing by the day. We add about 30 books a week to our own collection. They're growing by the day. I'll never catch up in that, but the world that I read in is growing, and it gives me more ideas of where to take it. So I think it's given me a lot more by having that orbit, as I say, around the library, and a vibe of what we should have in it.
It's obvious that the whole concept would only work if you were a passionate reader yourself. I mean, it's not something that somebody else could just pick up and run with. I mean, you have to be a passionate reader and understand the value of books and reading.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, that first year opened my eyes, as you said. Like, I found the value of reading, and it took over me, and I thought it's something I need to do more. I think I'll forever have a bit in my head about like what, no matter if I lived 100, I'll never read all the books that are out there, but you've got that sort of like need to see as much as possible and experience all the things. So I went from someone who hadn't picked a book up since like early 20s, and I started this 5 years ago when I was in my late 30s. So it'd been a long time since I'd spent any time reading outside of maybe the magazines or an odd little clipping. So I went from someone who didn't read to now being like, that's one of my main hobbies. That is the thing I do most over the course of the week.
I think probably a barrier to reading is that people don't identify themselves as a reader. You might feel it's an intellectual pursuit, when it really it's not, is it? It can be whatever you want it to be, because there's so much range there.
It's about finding your feet, I think. If you find what you're passionate about, you'll soon come to life.
Yeah.
And it does grow. Like, if you stick at it, and I think it's about finding that line of things that you're into. Like John Waters opened me up to a lot of Americana, and I realised how passionate I was about that, mainly because I think from like watching so much American films, I had this feel for it, this sort of false American dream thing that runs throughout all sort of contemporary Americana, where it's books or films. And that sort of was my main sort of passion in that first year. And it's grown outside of that to lots of stuff. But I think if you get that line, you won't stop. You know, you'll keep going.
I think you and I have something in common in that I've also got that bug of the American dream. I spent time living in America, and I was actually married to an American, and it's amazing how the American dream, Americana, does infect other cultures. And it's, of course it does at the commercial level, but you know, at the artistic level it does as well, and it really touches your imagination.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely live for it, and it is like maybe like there's a negativity to it from you look back to the Beats or even before then. You know, I recently read I still feel like I'm finding my favourite books along the way, and I've read hundreds over the last couple of years. And I recently read a book by a guy called Joseph Mitchell. Joseph Mitchell was a guy who wrote for the New Yorker, and he wrote from the late 20s to say, I think it was 64 when he stopped. And he wrote these articles that were deep dives on people in New York who people walked past in the street and didn't realise their story, or people, unique people. Like he interviewed a gifted child. There was a bearded lady who went on tour with circuses. There was a bar manager who very early 40s changed into a gin bar, gentrified his dive bar into a gin bar, and it was a disaster. And he spent time in these, and he wrote these amazing essays, and it's one of the best bit of Americana I've ever read. But it's also very sad as well, you know. But he years later, when he read back it, and he wrote the introduction to the book I read, he talked about this graveyard humour. And so I think Americana across the board has got that. The Beats had it to a certain extent, where they were really proud, but also they had no money and they lived dreadful lives, you know, and they weren't good people, a lot of them. And I think there's something about that that's just attractive to read. I find that disaster sort of humour like quite funny, and also like quite an amazing thing to take in.
Sure. So tell me how your members access the TRASHO Biblio. Is it through Facebook, or is it through the website, or how does it work?
So we have a main website, and we have an Instagram page. The entire way we built up has been nearly 100% word of mouth. I've very rarely spoken about it. I think this is only the third interview in 5 years that I've actually sat down to do.
Right.
Because I tend not to bother. I don't really like having a face on the library. I like it being a library. So on the website, we've got a library system you can click through to. Once people have joined up by an annual subscription fee, they then sign through to this website, and they basically just select the book they want, and I send it out by post. And then when they return that, they get an option to take out another book, and so on and so on. I advertise every new book we get on Instagram, and I use that as the main portal to connect with people. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why we've had such a humongous intake, word of mouth, is I'm really keen I grew up in a generation of forums and using Reddit to my advantage and all these things. So on Instagram, I make sure to set up like friends groups that people I know who get along, and they've been thriving. There's one there for librarians that's really busy, and they give me the insight on that side of things from the more organised official libraries. So I get that sort of word of mouth. There's one for booksellers, and they're always discussing what's coming up, and that gives me an eye of what's coming that's new. But separate to that, anyone who is on the Instagram page and is chatting, I'll chat to them all night if they want to. The reason being is I want that interaction. I want them to know the library is there for them as well. And I think forming that community's brought me on to having something that's never been advertised. And it's an art project that, you know, the overheads of our project is in 3 figures. Yet we have 500 people at least every year sign up and give us £15, which gives us a book budget bigger than any public library at the moment outside of the main hubs. So we're building something special here without really talking about it.
Have you ever had a member not return a book? Is that an issue?
It's always, I mean, when I first started it out, I had such trepidation, and it comes in ebbs and flows as every time that happens. It very rarely happens, a lot less than what people might think. And it's always sore if somebody disappears and takes a book. I didn't build this for value. I built it for people to read and to have access to books. And I realised that sometimes people pay £15 and they can take out books that are worth thousands of pounds. That's a gamble I took, and it's just something I've taken on board. It always sting, but it's a passionate group of people. Like, they don't have to sign up, and they sign up. I mean, just to show the passion behind this. You can only take out a book if you're in the UK. We've got about 500 members, and about 150 of those are in the UK. The rest are dotted about the world. We've got a massive American following and a massive like Australian following. And they pay us just to keep us going. They're just happy they exist. They're like, this is cool, let's do it. And it's not, maybe not, because it's like £15 to sign up for the year, it's not a lot of money, but they're like, just take it. And I've tried to offer them everything in the world, a newsletter, and they're like, no, just keep this going. And over that time, people have visited, like, from the States and said, can we come and see it? And I'm like, of course you can. You come and spend the night if you want. We've got a spare room, if that's what they want to do. And it's about, I'm very much about community. And so although sometimes like bad things happen to people disappear over expensive books, there's enough good things happening that I don't really care. And also that's the point is if that book goes on and they keep it and read it all the time and share it with their friends, I'm fine as long as people are reading it. If they sell it because they're skint, that's also fine by me. I'd rather have somebody had money in their pocket. I'm not that worried about it.
You've obviously created a very positive culture with that's full of respect for the vision of what you're trying to achieve. So it's great that it's not an issue, but it is like an obvious question that anybody hearing about it, well, what if you get screwed?
I think if it escalated, I would have a real worry. I would consider what we do, because we don't charge late fees or anything, because everyone reads at a different pace. And I was saying, it wasn't that long ago in the past where I wasn't a big reader. It took me about a while to like pick up that pace of reading a book or two a week. And so I understand, and I want people to pick up books. And for me, if anyone's reading anything, where it's a Mills and Bourne's romantic novel to Joseph Mitchell, I'm pretty happy to, like, as long as people are reading. But like my job is this little side library that doesn't affect any other bookshop or library, is to get people reading cool things, and I want to be there for them. I think I can find people's passion and be like, I've got something for you. If you like punk, I do so much for you. If you like cinema, I can give you like a bit of a history of it. I think there's something there for everyone, but maybe not in it from the mainstream.
I'm assuming that you have a real passion for physical books as well, though. I mean, some people, my mother, for example, she has a Kindle, and I would never get one because it just doesn't interest me. I mean, how do you feel about Kindles?
I'm finding people are reading. The reason why I've got them in two minds, I'll always have a physical book until I have to, because I know people who read on Kindles and things through accessibility, but for me, I will always buy the physical book until I have to like move over, and I'm totally fine with that. I love a physical book. It's really hard to get past it. There's something about finishing it and getting to that end page and watching the right hand side of the book get thinner as you move along. That's cool to me.
Excuse me a second, Tommy, my phone keeps vibrating.
No worries.
I think it's actually gone into emergency call for some reason. Just turn that off. It's driving me crazy. Aye. Yeah, so what I didn't tell you before when we first met was I actually collect books, and I don't always read them. Sometimes I collect books because they're so beautiful. I brought some along to let you see because
amazing.
I've read all of these books, but it's interesting that this one here, which is such a famous book, and I got it for £1 second hand, but I looked. This publication is quite old, but in the UK it was 80p. It's the Gulag Archipelago, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. But it's amazing to me that you can pick up a treasure like that.
Yeah.
For so little money, and it can change your life. And that's not actually beautiful. That book, it's just a cheap sort of publication. But this one I've got is a first edition. And that's The Duchess of Padua by Oscar Wilde and Salome. Actually, they're both in there. And you can have a look at that.
That's an incredible thing to have, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll get the pages as well with the rough cut as well. Amazing. That's a very incredible thing to have. Keep it safe.
Aye. So I also have this one as well. That's The Shame of Oscar Wilde, but that's a book on private publication. There's only a few hundred copies made.
Oh wow!
But I got that on eBay. So where do you source your books yourself?
So we're really lucky because we've been big buyers. So initially we were getting them from charity shops, and when we wanted to get something quite expensive, we had a few second-hand shops that we knew sold the sort of things that we were after. So I use a few online sites such as Abe Books and Oxfam. The Oxfam main website's got a brilliant book side of it, so we do use that a lot. But we've been really lucky as we've grown. We've attracted people who are second-hand buyers or own second-hand shops, and they reach out to us when they've got something we want, because they've instantly recognised that we've got a bit of an orbit and they know what to offer us. Separate to that, we've been really lucky because we're quite esoteric. There's a lot of charity bookshops who don't have much use for it because it's not the most recent James Patterson book or Stephen King book. So they are happy to keep the weird stuff aside from us. And when I've been going to Edinburgh, they'll be like, I've got a pile for you to look through. And I've been able to like get like first dibs on a lot of things. But that took a lot of spending an awful lot of money. They knew that I was donating that to charity to keep me a set pile. So charity shops, second-hand shops, and constantly keeping an eye out. We've had a lot of private collectors contact us, but it's tough. It's tough because I find that everyone who does that are usually a bit more expensive than what I know the book's worth. And I'm representing a community, and I'm not just spending my money, I'm spending money of a lot of members who are passionate to see me grow. So we've been like careful in who we buy from and spending the right amount of money. And I don't have anyone to justify it because it's just like, essentially it's me and my partner who run it, and we run it from our flat, and it's a DIY project. Despite it being successful, there's no board or anything. But I still want to be able to come back to the community and not say I spent £500 on a £100 book. I want to get it right every time, so I'm a bit careful.
Do you think you would ever look for an official premises for your collection?
There might be. Like, definitely, it's crossed my mind. There was a time before we moved flats, like halfway through the point of me running this, because it was getting a bit too much for the small flat we're in. And bizarrely, we moved to the flat right next door that was bigger. So we got a much bigger space. So there is a set library within our house. And it's an amazing thing to have. It's one of the reasons I'm passionate about it. In terms of a shop front, we have looked at spaces before and considered it. My worry is we've been so successful that our overheads are so small because it's in our flat. We pay quite a lot of insurance, and the books are an asset. So the rest of the running, like the library, the software stuff, is quite cheap. It's not too expensive to run. And I worry about shop front denting that book budget and setting us back, or would we attract enough people to like keep it going? Secondly, we undoubtedly have quite a notable underground following who've liked that, like somewhere hidden in Edinburgh in a flat is a ridiculous counterculture library that fits with the ethics of a lot of people who join us. And so I've never bought a storefront in case they felt it was too public. I think we get a lot of people who are into the idea of like this hidden gem that no one knows where it is.
I love that, because I mean, what you've created is so precious. I wouldn't want anything bad to happen, you know.
Yeah.
And you want to, presumably you would want to have some kind of way of protecting the books, and so a place that's fireproof, or you know, when you think about all the great libraries that have been wiped out. I went to a place called Ephesus a few years ago in Turkey, and there was a public library in the ruins of this city, but it was covered by a mudslide. And also the Library of Alexandria as well.
Yeah, of course.
And these travesties happen, but I mean, what you're doing is it completely original, the concept, or have other people done it elsewhere?
So when I started it, I just thought it was just a wee thing, so I never really thought about looking into the idea of independent libraries. But like, there's actually a massive spate of them. There's like quite a few in Edinburgh that, like, you know, the one that's just off the Royal Mile is a very, like, you know, they've got first editions of Robert Burns and stuff. I can't remember the name. It's called Blackie House. Is that not an independent library? But there's also ones in Manchester and Newcastle that are like accessible big libraries to the public that are private. They're not council run, and they run on membership. So they've been around for hundreds of years.
And they post out
they've got a physical library, so you can go and collect it. I think it's for a particular area. Right. The posting out thing, I just took that from the way that lovefilm.com used to work. You know, you used to get a DVD and post it back. It's just the easiest way to access a big wide amount of people. We've been asked to like make it a bit more European wide, but postage isn't, like, just doesn't work really, and I'd be a bit scared of sending it even further away in the UK. Yeah. So it's just a worry. But yeah, that would be the case. To go back and talk about like how you protect the library, you can only do your best, really. And I recently told someone, I think it's totally true, I don't think I've been on a holiday, even for a night away from the flat, that I didn't like stop at the library and have some sort of mental like saying goodbye to it just in case, because like if it went, I'd be devastated, because it living in my house is just like the best thing in the world, because obviously even though I don't have the background, I've been able to create something that's pretty special that like at least 500 people like, I want those books. And a lot more who've not bought memberships are saying to themselves, I want those books, and they live in a room in my house, and that's amazing to me. I get to go look at them, I sit there all the time and daydream about them.
What you're involved in must be a great way to connect with really interesting people as well. I mean, like you were talking about the community, but do you have famous people or academics, or I mean,
We've got quite a few academics. I've been, good things have came from it. Definitely, there's not all very I could speak about, because there's a few people who have given this money for the library who are notable, but they did it in a private way because they didn't want to be chased by anyone else.
Sure.
So it does attract like a lot of people. A lot of great things have come from it. I got to finally have a 10-minute phone call with John Waters, like a Zoom call, which was great because he's a legend and a real hero of mine. And recently I got to interview the biographer Jimmy McDonough, who's wrote biographies about Tammy Wynette and Neil Young, and he's the go-to guy of that sort of world, but he's also got a background in exploitation films as well, and that he's the expert to go for that. So I found myself interviewing him recently about his most recent book, which was for an online event a few weeks ago, and that's amazing. I wouldn't have been offered that 5 years ago, but now like people are like, that's the guy to go to. He also likes like weird stuff that's maybe not part of the mainstream, so like go and chat to him and he could be the person to do the interview, and that's amazing to me. I'll take that every bit of that as a win, and even being invited along here today is a win for me. I think it's great. Like this isn't what I do as a job, I do this as a hobby, and getting to talk about it is where I'm at. I'm happy talking about it all the time.
Well, I certainly hope that this conversation is of some benefit to your project and that it helps get the word out there. Would you consider setting up your own podcast and doing something like that, just to promote the...
It has, because I'm always thinking, how do you grow it? And it's, especially in the last year where it's been really busy and we're coming up to that 5-year mark, I've been thinking, like, what do I do with it? A podcast is something I think I could do. I think there's plenty of people out there that we know who would talk to us, but like we've got a few contemporaries and peers who do it, and I just wondered, like, is there a space for me? Am I doing something different to them? And I wonder if they're a bit too similar. So that's what puts me off doing that. The other thing that we have investigated, but we're just not bit into it yet because it's still a bit too pricey for us, is publishing our own stuff. That's a dream. That was like, a couple of years ago I said, this is getting big now, I want to put out our own books, because we've got a ready market, and if you get a micro run of like 200 books, we've already got 500 members and a lot more people watching this.
What kind of books?
I think I would like to tap into stuff that is not currently ready available at the moment, stuff that's been just now out of print. One of the ones that I did look at, which I think is now about to go back into print annoyingly, was Deborah Spongen's book. Deborah Spongen was the mum of Nancy Spungen, who was murdered by Sid Vicious from the Sex Pistols, and there was a pretty terrible relationship between them two. And Deborah Spongen wrote his book in the aftermath of that and talked about the impact of the press on her in that case and her family. And it gives you the backstory of Nancy away from Sid, and it's incredible. Everyone's got to read it. And I did reach out to a few people to try and look into doing that, but we never took it any further because it was, at that time, everything was too expensive to do. But we're getting bigger, and I do want to do something different with it. I want it to be a library, but we should do more. And I thought about having in-person events. We have taken some of the funds from the library and bought places at book clubs that we like, because a lot of book clubs are run by incredible independent shops, but they're not in a position financially to say, here's 5 places free of charge if anyone's having a hard time with it, especially now in a cost of living crisis. So I've taken some of those money and reached out to those bookshops and say, can I buy like 5 places and a book and just give them to people who are skint? Because I want everyone to have access to cool things. Sure. You shouldn't just rely on, if your local library might talk about something that's cool. If a brilliant bookshop's doing something that's a little bit not mainstream, I want to be able to fund someone to access that. So we've used that. So I probably will do a bit more of that in the future.
You've clearly come to this with a very charitable spirit and a passion for not just the books, but also people enjoying the books. I think that's really laudable, and that's what's making it a success. The attitude that you have. You're not out to make a fast buck or anything like that. It's about that. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of gatekeeping in all cultural sectors, and Scotland is, like, obviously, as you well know, I've got a good viewpoint across all the different art forms within Scotland and heritage to that side, but there's a lot of gatekeeping. Like, I'm going to show this film, so that film belongs to me, even though I didn't work on it, or I'm going to talk about this book, so that book sort of belongs to me, despite them not writing it. And I've got zero belief in that. I think it's everyone's. And when people do that, when they have that sort of niche thing that they're not willing to share, it stunts it, and I don't believe in it. I think art for all. Absolutely, and I think that's why you and I connected when we first met. Because as you'll know, that this building that we're in, it's an old fire station, which is now an art centre, and it's there to provide accessibility
to everybody, to the arts, and it's not elitist or esoteric or anything like that. It's just about, and because of that, we have such a great bunch of people coming in here and using the building, and we never have any significant problems to speak of. Even the bar, there's never any bar fights or any trouble. It's just there's a convivial atmosphere and a sort of atmosphere, a culture of generosity, that exists, and that's obviously thriving in your project. So I was going to ask you about the books. The books themselves. I mean, you must have some very rare books in the collection. Can you think of them?
The one that I always think of was actually a gift to me, and I've let people read it in small bits if they're at the library, because some people do who know me well, or some people who've got to be long time members have nipped round the flat and sat down and looked at books, and so that's when they see this one. There's a Nigel Hawthorne book, and the name is going to escape me now, but it came from the library of a silent film director called King Vidor. So King Vidor was one of the biggest ever silent video film directors, and he went on to be quite noted because he very quickly adapted to new technology, and he got from silent movies all the way to 3D. And if you look back in the history of Hollywood or film in general, those hurdles of technology, so much talent was lost. Not everyone went from silent to talkies into colour into bigger different sound, into 3D, into surround sound. So many people were lost, but King Vidor jumped them no problem, and continually won awards and created great films. And so the book that I have got, it was from his private collection, and it's got the imprint. He had a stamp that embossed the book, so he's got his embossed inside it. But even within it, it's got notes, and it took me a while to put it together that he made it, because he made hundreds of films. He made the film of this book, and this is the book that he obviously used to take notes to write his script for it.
Wow!
So that's a big thing to have, and that's a very precious thing to me. Outside of that, there's a lot of counterculture stuff, or maybe 80s, 90s stuff that you actually could have picked up in FOP in the 90s, but is now just not available anywhere. And there's a book by Cookie Muller, I'm a big fan of. She wrote it came out in the maybe early 90s, called Ask Dr. Muller. Now, when that came out initially, as I said, you could pick up in FOP for a $5. And I recently got a copy about 2 years ago. But there's been a huge passion for it all of a sudden, because stuff's starting to be released, because her work wasn't released, but now there's a huge movement on now to get it all out there. And late on last year, a compilation of her work came out. It was similar, but that book there, that Ask Dr. Muller book with a John Waters intro, went from being a tenner or 20 quid online to be more thousands of pounds overnight. And it's just how that secondhand book market works. And that's also the reason why we exist, because people I was priced out of books, and because of this rise of trying to scramble to get a particular copy. So I'm now happy to have a copy of that, and I've been able to share that with people so you can see the original copy.
So to take the conversation kind of full circle to where we started, a more general question: why do you think people should read, particularly young people?
I think it's an absolute gateway to so many other things. I think so. Music gives you that sort of dreamscape. You can think about you dream about your person on stage. You can dream about, if you fancy the person in the band, you can dream about going to see them live. You've got that side of it. Movies, you're seeing someone's idea being laid out. That's their idea. It can inspire you in other ways. But I think books tap into a different part of your imagination. You've got to do everything. You've got to. You can cast the characters in it for your favourite actor or not. You can see what the sets look like. You can live somewhere else in your head, and you can travel the world quite quickly. And I know you can do it through film and music, but there's something very full on about books. So for me, they're vital. And I think I definitely feel I'd never felt like an education person, but over the last 5 years working on this project and becoming a ferocious reader, I do feel a lot more intelligent. There's a lot more to it. And it gives you that sort of wide variety of things, especially if you find something you're passionate about and you follow all the arms and legs from that as well.
I'm sure you've had the experience of reading a book and you felt like it actually fundamentally changed the core of your perception about the world.
Absolutely, definitely. I thought there was I understood punk. I thought I understood Americana, but I didn't. Yeah, that wasn't even tip of the iceberg. And over the last couple of years, there's this thing. It's really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I've got a lot more to talk about and a lot more to delve into. And I'm not sure I'll ever complete that, and I think that's quite nice as well. That you'll never get to the outer rim of all the books you could read. You know.
Yeah. Is there a book that changed you, profoundly, that you would recommend to listeners?
I actually think, and I recommend this all the time, and there's a few. I think everyone in the world's got to read The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. That is fundamentally the best book it was ever written. She wrote that when she was 23, and at 23 I was a moron. I was just an idiot. So for her to create this absolute epic is incredible. So everyone's got to read that.
Could you say the title again, please?
Oh, sorry. It's The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. Separate to that, you've got Emmett Grogan's Ringolevio. I can't remember how to spell it. So Ringolevio was a type of game that played on the streets of New York. It's like a very extreme version of Tig Tag. And it's meant to be his biography. He only lived to 38, 39 or something. But it's got to be the most embellished biography I've ever read, but it's incredible. You can't put it down. Within that time, he travelled the world. He became a cat burglar. He won a prestigious Italian film award. He built a church on the top of the Alps. And if it's true, he led more of a life than any of the rest of us put together. But it's one of the most captivating books. And I think he went on to lead a group called the Diggers, not the medieval Diggers, but the San Francisco Diggers, who helped fight that battle, not against the hippie movement, the flower power movement, because young people who were middle class were moving to San Francisco without any money and living on the streets. And so he set up a thing to feed them and trying to direct them back home, and trying also to help the people in San Francisco who were genuinely poor, who lived there in the first place. So he set up a group called the Diggers to do that, and his life story is wild. Even if it's not true, he knew his stuff.
It's incredible that you're able to share that story with us right now, all because you've read that book, and it's something that you can just pick up and put in your pocket and take it away.
That's it.
And give it, a few hours or
and that's
a few days
millions,
of your time.
Yeah, that's it. So I think you're right. That size, and it could change your life. I
had this strange experience where I ordered a book on Amazon, and it was a book. It was written by Carl Jung. I think it was Psychology and Alchemy. So a book written quite a while ago, sometime mid-20th century. But when the book came, it was brand new. And I suddenly had this feeling a book is really just a vehicle for information. That's all it is. It's all the pages were glossy, and you didn't feel like, it was, obviously it's the content that matters. But, that's the magic of a book.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle for information, and it's a powerful one, and that's why you have to protect them so much.
Absolutely. And I'm always amused, and I actually generally don't know where I sit in this as well, but people within the library and within the sort of wider community of the library have got different values around actual books. So an actress who's a friend of the library but not a member, who's got quite a big following online, caused a bit of a storm online because she was going to a set, but she was only going to go there for 2 weeks, and she was reading a book that was 1,000 pages long. So she cut the book in half and took the half with her so she didn't take too much luggage, and she put this online, and the fallout was huge. There was members of the library saying you don't wreck books and you don't do that. But it started this debate about, isn't the story the thing? Is it not the content that's good, or is it having the physical book? And outside the sustainability of wasting something that's been created and the paper behind it, I admit that I was devastated to see her rip a book in half, but she did read it as well, and she did talk about it much more passionately than people. I just don't know where I sit. Is it is the value in the actual book, or is it the physical thing, or is it both? And
she was definitely wrong.
Yeah, that's it. I did wince when I seen it, and I was very glad she wasn't a member of our library. And I messaged to be I'm so glad that wasn't one of my books he did that to. But she was adamant that look, I've got 2 weeks and I can only take so much with me. I'm not going to stop reading this thing, but I can only take so much of it. Yeah. So and she talked, I think it came from her very much having a thespian background. It is a very thespian background. She was it's the content, not the physical thing. And two people were caught up in the physical thing and not the content.
But she ruined the life of that book for somebody else.
That was my thoughts, that it's gone now. Yeah. Or, I mean, she claims she still got it, but I doubt it.
I have some nice books at home which have beautiful artist plates. You know, I'm an artist myself, so an awful lot of art books, and I hate to see where people have cut the prints out of the book and then framed them, and they've just destroyed the book so that they can then sell the prints or just have them on their wall. You don't see it too often nowadays, but it used to be a thing.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah, because we buy second hand, like for the 90% of it, because we do buy into the future. I'm buying books that only came out recently because I know they'll fit into the library in a couple of years' time. I never put in new books, so that's one thing we're careful with, is any books that are like free, it's only been the first release been in the last 3 years, I don't put into the library. I love independent bookshops. That's where I go all the time. I'm not going to do anything that harms them. They should get a first chance to sell it. But if it's been out for years, then everyone's got it. Then I can have it in the library, so it doesn't make any difference. So I am buying for future. But yeah, when we buy second hand, you do find, for me, and I actually quite like it because I think there's something quite personal with it, I find all the notes and stuff if people have been reading the book or they've highlighted a bit. And sometimes I'm thinking, why have they highlighted this line? It makes, I can't think of any value between this basic line. Sometimes they've written a translation beside it. If somebody moves into French within the book or whatever, you know, if it's a different language, they've written their own translation. And I sort of love that personally. I've had a few people say to me that book's got scribbles over it, but I'm actually all right with that.
I think it depends how recent the scribbles were. If it's a book from the 1940s and, you know, you feel like you're going back in time and you're getting an insight into people's lives and things, but when it's more contemporaneous vandalism, then it sort of upsets you more. But
I've received so many books that have had postcards, letters, photographs all stuck inside that haven't been taken out by the seller, and that's always amazing. And I always do read them because you're just like, what is this crazy insight, and how somebody lost something that's personal. Sometimes they are particularly personal as well, and you think, did they want me to send this back? But I know I'm buying from shops most of the time, so I know the shop doesn't care who got it, but I do wonder about lost love letters and stuff, and photographs especially.
Yeah. Well, I think that'll do us for today, Tommy. And it's been absolutely fascinating listening to you and your amazing project, and we wish you great success with it. Continued success.
Thank you so much for having me along. It's been amazing. It's good to chat about it because, as I said, I very rarely do, so it's nice to have the opportunity to chinwag about it.
So one last time, just remind us where people can access TRASHO Biblio.
If you go to the website TRASHO Biblio, so that's TRASHOBIBLIO.com. That'll take you to all the different ports to look at what books we've got and to join up, or just to see our Instagram to see what we're talking about and what we're up to.
Great. Well, we'll certainly put that in the link also.
Thank you.